Now says live.
Oh, don't you like this? There we go. Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. And as always, in case you haven't figured it out, I am so conservative that I have trouble turning left even when I'm driving. This is broadcast number 14, and our guest tonight is Dr. E. Calvin Beisner, founder and national spokesman of the Cornwall Alliance for the Steward Ship of Creation. We're talking about the climate hustle, and no, it isn't the latest song, but the current government-backed scam. My name is Don Vino, and I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of tonight's webcast.
Greetings from sunny Florida. If there wasn't a climate hustle dance, there should have been. In the meantime, our sponsors this week, first starting with our usual World's End Theology outlet, your one-stop destination for dubious doctrines, half-baked heresies, and other notions whose time has gone. World's End Theology outlet. And also, the Institute of Approved Mentality is our new sponsor this week, promoting intellectual hygiene through programs of mass re-education. The Institute of Approved Mentality. Back to you guys. Go ahead.
Well, Dr. Beisner, I had noticed a couple of, well, maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, in your one of your email broadcasts, a film, The Climate Hustle, that had a one-night showing in about 400 theaters. And so I went ahead and purchased tickets for my grandson and I. My grandson, in fact, just turned 15. And he's interested in these things because, of course, in school he's learning all about the apocalyptic meltdown of the Earth because of humans using too much underarm deodorant and hairspray and such. And so
that's all through highly balanced and objective scientific education, right?
Yeah.
Both sides brought before your son. He gets to see all the different arguments by all the different scientists, right?
Well, yeah. You know, unfortunately, or fortunately, depends on which way you look at it, for him, he's raised in a home that his mother was raised in a home of apologists, and that's what we do. We just argue with the TV, argue with the radio, argue with the newspapers. We kind of argue with everything, saying where's the evidence. And so he has learned how to ask those questions. It was a well done documentary. As I've looked at some of the reviews, none of the reviews really said there was any scientific inaccuracy, just that they are climate deniers.
If you can't argue with the evidence, back the person.
So when did we start denying that we actually have a climate?
I know that your interest in this is kind of the purpose of the existence of the Cornwall Alliance, but for those who haven't seen our previous webcast with you or know much about the Cornwall Alliance, what do you guys do?
Well, we are a network of about 60 scholars, roughly a third of them natural scientists, including a number of climate scientists, PhD'd, outstanding world-class scholars in the field. About a third also are economists and policy wonks, especially dedicated to either the economics of the environment or the economics of development for the poor. And a third are theologians, philosophers, and ethicists. All of us evangelical Christians, all of us committed to the authority of Scripture and all of the fundamental doctrines of the Christian faith. We exist to promote three things simultaneously through educational outreach. The first is biblical earth stewardship, or what we also call godly dominion, taking the term dominion from Genesis 1:28, where, having created man and woman in his image, God says, blesses them and says to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and everything that creeps on the face of the earth. The second major emphasis that we have is economic development for the poor around the world. Think in terms of places like sub-Saharan Africa, which we see as coming from a combination of on the one hand, private property rights, free markets, entrepreneurship, limited government, the rule of law, and so on. And on the other hand, access to abundant, affordable, reliable energy. And without either of those, one or the other of those, no society has ever risen out of poverty or can stay out of it. And then the third major focus for us is the proclamation and defense of the gospel of Christ. All of this in a world that is permeated by an environmental movement whose worldview, theology, and ethics are overwhelmingly anti-Christian, whose science and economics are typically poorly done, and whose policies, therefore, frequently are not of much use to the natural environment, but are very harmful to the poor around the world, slowing their rise out of poverty, trapping them in the high rates of disease and premature death that invariably come with poverty, and just basically making their lives miserable. And then finally, this movement has been infiltrating churches very intentionally, backed by many millions of dollars poured into these infiltration efforts by left-wing foundations like the Tides Foundation, Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Rockefeller Family Foundation, Hewlett Foundation, and so on. All of these strong supporters not only of environmentalism, but also of population control and abortion on demand around the world. And they're seeking to do what they call greening the gospel, which basically means turning the gospel into something like, if you love God, take good care of the earth. Well, it's true. If you love God, you should take good care of the earth. But that's not the gospel. The gospel is Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures. He was buried. He rose again from the dead on the third day according to the Scriptures. That's Paul's summary in 1 Corinthians 15. The gospel is good news about what God has done, whereas the law is what we are supposed to do in obedience to God. And taking good care of the earth, law, not gospel. And as Paul points out in Romans 3, by the works of the law, no flesh will be justified.
Okay, so the gospel is how one has peace with God, how we are born again, saved, whatever language you want to use to describe that aspect of the relationship. Christ redeems us from the curse of sin. What happens on the other side of that is our actions, how we ought to live as people of God. Taking care of creation would be part of that. But you're right, that is not the gospel. That is something we do subsequent to hearing and receiving the gospel.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's really important to keep that in mind, because what this really means is that environmental stewardship, godly dominion, which is our term for it, godly dominion in which we seek to enhance the fruitfulness, the beauty, and the safety of the earth to the glory of God and the benefit of our neighbors, so that we're really addressing the two great commandments, to love God and to love neighbor. Those things really can't be done very well until we have been reconciled to God, so that our minds then can be transformed by the Word of God, so that we're no longer conformed to the ways of this world, but we become godly in our thinking. We tear down strongholds. We refute every argument that sets itself up against God, and we come to understand His creation better. God created us in His image with rational minds to understand the ordered universe that He, a rational God, planned, created, and sustains. But as long as we're in rebellion against God, we have a more difficult time understanding and therefore also properly ruling and subduing and cultivating and guarding this earth. So the preaching of the gospel is actually an important step toward, though it is not the same thing as, environmental stewardship.
Right. So environmental stewardship, this is interesting because it just created another little question in my brain. I always see groups, since we deal mostly with cults and false religious groups, I often see groups that want to sort of Christianize the world. They want them to behave in more Christianly ways, ending up with maybe better behaved sinners, but unredeemed sinners nonetheless.
Yeah.
Is that kind of happening with this environmentalist movement moving into the church, sort of creating this idea of if we behave better toward the earth, God will be more pleased with us, thus making them more Christianly in behavior, quote unquote, although not Christians in actuality.
Well, to the extent that the environmentalist pseudo-gospel replaces the real biblical gospel, I think that that's a fair description of what's going on. Unfortunately, this happens even in books by evangelical Christians, people whose own saving faith in Jesus Christ I would have no particular reason to doubt, but who, when they write on this theme, I think frequently write with a fairly significant lack of understanding the theology of the Bible, the theology of the reconciling work of Christ. So that, for example, if you read the book The Gospel According to the Earth by Matthew Sleeth, one of the most popular writers in this field, he speaks frequently about the gospel, and of course it's in the title of the book itself. And yet, you can go all the way through the book and you never do find an explicit definition of the gospel. You never do find his saying that the gospel is, as Paul said, that Christ died for our sins, that he was buried, that he rose again from the dead. Instead, if, like me, I mean, I've taught systematic theology in the past in seminary, I am something of a systematic theologian. You look for bits and pieces that you can put together and you relate those to each other logically. And it really was as I was reading his book, The Gospel According to the Earth, that I realized that in essence what he was saying was the gospel was, if you love God, take good care of the earth. And as I said, it's true. If you love God, you should take good care of the earth, and you'll want to take good care of the earth. But that's not the gospel. If you love God, you'll also want to respect your neighbor's property and therefore not steal. You'll want to respect your neighbor's marriage and therefore not commit adultery. You'll want to respect your neighbor's reputation and therefore not bear false witness. You'll want to honor the Sabbath day and respect your parent, father and mother, and all the commandments of God. You'll want to obey those if you have been reconciled to Christ. But you know that those are law, not gospel.
Right.
Law doesn't save, gospel does.
So what we're really talking about is the third use of the law here, right? Is called by Reformed Christians the obeying God out of gratitude for salvation. And what, it seems to me that this greening of the gospel kind of talk is part of a larger battle over the definition of the word gospel that goes back through the social gospel phase. Each time we see the law mixed in with the gospel as if the law is the gospel,
right?
And a complete distraction from the church's mission. It's not a bad thing, but it completely distracts from our mission.
Yeah, it really is. It's legalism in two different senses of the word. In theological ethics, we speak of legalism in two different ways. On the one hand, legalism is a false soteriology, a false doctrine of salvation. And that says, by the keeping of the law, I'm going to be justified. I'm going to be declared righteous by God, acceptable in his sight, reconciled to him, and assured of eternal fellowship with him after I die. That's soteriological or salvation-oriented legalism, and that, of course, is condemned in the book of Romans. But another sense of legalism is an ethical sense, and that is when people substitute human-made rules for God's rules. It's what Jesus was talking about when he said, people substitute the traditions of men for the commandments of God. And that then results in our being told that we must do all kinds of things that, frankly, God in his law doesn't tell us to do. Paul warns about that in Colossians chapter 2 and also in Romans chapter 14. And particularly in Colossians 2, it's a very informative passage there, verses about 19 through 23, where Paul speaks of those who are into asceticism. They're into self-denial of all kinds. And he says, these things may perhaps do some good for the body, but they do nothing for the control of our sinful lusts. What he's saying there is, this is not a matter of ethics. This is a matter of personal preference and so on. And he specifically condemns that as a substituting of human regulations, man-made rules, for God's rules in the law. So we want to avoid both soteriological legalism and ethical legalism. And unfortunately, an awful lot of the environmental movement really tends toward ethical legalism, the substituting of all kinds of rules, such as you have to recycle or you're sinning. Well, sometimes recycling makes good sense, and sometimes it doesn't. With some substances, it does. With some, it doesn't. Not just in terms of economics, but even in terms of the health of ecosystems. Or increasingly, environmentalists are telling us we should not eat meat. We should all be vegetarians or perhaps even vegans. And this would help to save the planet. Well, as a matter of fact, Scripture tells us that God made all the different living things for us to receive with thanksgiving. And Paul condemns those who forbid the eating of meat. He's not saying that vegetarianism or even veganism is wrong in itself. He's saying it's wrong to make that a rule that binds the consciences of other people.
Right. All right, and that's an important thing. Now, so you've spoken well from the Christian standpoint to those who are trying to Christianize the green movement, and I was concerned as I was on my way to see the Climate Hustle, because I don't know if you and I have talked about this before. I've had conversations with others. I am generally unimpressed with Christian-made films. For a whole variety of reasons. They're really made for the already persuaded and tend to be weak in production and facts oftentimes. I didn't find that here. I didn't walk into a film as I was watching it that was overtly Christianizing. Maybe that's what word I want to use. They were more saying, look, here are the claims, and here's where they fall down. Yeah. Here are some who were supporting initially, say like Dr. Judith Curry, and in a minute you can tell us who that is, who initially said that she had signed on because her peers had signed on, and she frankly hadn't had the time to really do the research on it, but trusted her peers, and then subsequently started looking at some of the data. It was when the email scandal hit, and she started looking at that and became concerned that something less than honesty and integrity had been used in perpetrating this whole climate scare. As a result, she's been fairly substantially punished for being a climate denier. Who is Dr. Judith Curry, and why is that important?
Well, Dr. Judith Curry is a professor and the former chair of the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at Georgia Tech University. She's an extremely accomplished climatologist. She has been author or co-author of many refereed journal articles in the field. She's been a lead and contributing author to the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change assessment reports of 2001, 2007, and 2013. She is just, she's a stellar climatologist, climate scientist. She in 2009 and 10, when the ClimateGate scandal occurred, in which thousands of emails were somehow or other released from the University of East Anglia's Climatic Research Unit, and in those emails, we got to see about 12.5 of the key figures in the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and NASA and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the National Climatic, Center for Atmospheric Research, other key figures in promoting alarm about climate change. We got to see them in these emails well, acknowledging to each other that they were fabricating data, exaggerating data, suppressing contrary data, intimidating scientists who disagreed, corrupting the peer review process, intimidating journal editors to get them not to publish contrary articles. They actually got one editor fired because he published a contrary article. All kinds of simply atrocious behavior that strikes at the very heart of science, which requires vigorous, open debate and complete open discussion of various points of view in order to do actually what the Apostle Paul tells us in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, test all things, hold fast what is good. That's really the key to science.
But you know, Dr. Beisner, you talk about all these things as if they're bad things.
Yes, indeed.
This is the liberal media's position. It's like they will say, no, none of these things. It's all been exaggerated. Everything's been taken out of context. In fact, I've yet to read a liberal account or a mainstream media account of ClimateGate that even really deals with any of the facts. For instance, an explanation of the famous "hide the decline" statement of Michael Mann. There was a song by Tommy James and the Shondells, I think it was called "Dragging the Line," and somebody came out with a video called "Hide the Decline" using the same music. Yes. It was a really great video. And it's like it's almost like we're in two different universes. There's this alternate universe where ClimateGate didn't actually happen. And then there's the one we live in where people have actually read the emails. And that seems to be the universe that Dr. Judith Curry exists in.
Yeah, and the universe I exist in. I read most of those several thousand emails released in 2009, and I read a couple of thousand of the almost 11,000 more released in 2011, 2 years later. And yeah, I've been there, done that.
So
and
you've actually read these emails. You've read them.
Oh yes, yes. I've read
I get the
emails
impression
themselves.
that you're one of the few probably who've actually read them, but everybody else has an opinion about them, whether they've read them or not.
Right. Right, but the fact is that all of this was implicit and explicit in the emails, and when Curry began to do some research about this, she really got concerned, and as a scientist she was thinking, this is just atrocious behavior, and for the first time in her career, she began actually corresponding with some of the most erudite critics of global warming alarmism, people like Stephen McIntyre, of Climate Audit, or Ross McKittrick, a good friend of mine who's a professor of environmental economics at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada, or Roy Spencer of the University of Alabama, who is in charge of the U.S. NASA satellite remote temperature sensing program. She started corresponding with these people and discovered that, hey, these are very intelligent people. These are people who are well knowledgeable in climate science, in the proper handling of statistics and data, and so on, which are crucial to the painting of the picture of what's happening temperature-wise around the Earth. And little by little, she shifted her position from having been very much in line with the IPCC's position that man-made global warming is not only real, but also so dangerous that it justifies spending trillions of dollars that could otherwise be spent to reduce hunger and disease and malnutrition and so on, to spend trillions of dollars trying to mitigate global warming. She shifted from that position to what she called a lukewarmer position, which is, yeah, man-made climate change is real. That is, human activity does contribute somewhat to the temperature of the Earth, probably warms it slightly, but only slightly. Natural causes are probably bigger than human causes on that. And the pace and ultimate magnitude of warming from CO2 emissions from human activity is slow enough and small enough that it will probably not be net harmful. In fact, it may well be net beneficial. When she made that switch, and it occurred over a period of about almost 4 years, that it took her to make that switch fully, it became increasingly clear that she was being ostracized by the alarmist climate science community, which is sort of the price you pay when you do that kind of thing. But nonetheless, she is an outstanding scientist. And in fact, the empirical data, the raw, hard data from observation, back that view. The only basis for the predictions of rapid magnitude warming driven by human emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere is the projections of computer models of the climate. But those computer models, on average, predict 2 to 3 times as much warming as actually observed around the world over the relevant period. 95% of them predict more warming than actually occurred, which indicates that the errors are not random. If they were random, they'd be as often below as above the observations. But instead, they're driven by some sort of bias, whether it's honest bias, just simply a mistake that has been replicated again and again and not recognized yet, or dishonest bias, an intentional tweaking of the programs to get the answers that the alarmists want. Frankly, we don't have to answer that question. That the bias is there is clear. And finally, none of the models predicted the complete absence of statistically significant global warming from February 1997 to December of 2015. That was a period that was in 10 months. And frankly, even the alarmists, for instance, with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, had said that if the pause, as they call it, in warming, which of course presupposes that it's going to resume later, I just call it the absence of warming. That's an unprejudiced term. But they said that if this absence or pause in the warming continued, initially they were saying if it continued for more than about 9 years, then it would show that the models were wrong. Well, it continued for more than 9 years, so they shifted that to 12 years. And then it continued for more than 12, so they shifted that to 15. Then it continued for more than 15, so now they're saying, well, it's got to be more than 20 years. And yet, all of a sudden, by the way, over the last few months, we've had exceptional warmth around the world, driven by an exceptionally strong El Nino in the South Pacific. Well, now they're saying, see, the warming has returned. Well, now wait a minute. If it required over 20 years for the pause to mess up the models, it's got to require more than a few months for this El Nino-driven warming to validate the models. At any rate, the empirical data is the warming is not nearly how much as the models of the IPCC predicted, and therefore the models provide no rational basis for fears about future temperatures, and therefore no rational basis for any policy to deal with that.
Okay. A couple of things before we go to our little break, Ron. In the showcase, for those who are viewing this either live or Memorex, if you will, if you remember those commercials, we have a couple of items. One of them is a link to a film that Dr. Cal Beisner's organization puts out. The grass is greener, Where the Grass is Greener, Biblical Stewardship versus Climate Alarmism. And that is something you probably should think about purchasing to get more information that you can share with your family, friends, neighbors, whoever's wandering down the street, just to get them informed. And then we're going to come back and talk about a little more about the climate hustle and some of the people who are involved with this. Ron, what do we hear from World's End Theology Outlet?
Well, we hear a lot from them lately. We all like to feel like we're in control of our destiny, and I know I do. But if you're an average baby boomer, you've been expecting the end of the world as we know it at least 7 times now, from things like air pollution, water pollution, overpopulation, nuclear warfare, biological warfare, the hole in the ozone layer, and asphyxiation, complete planetary asphyxiation due to the loss of the rainforest. Don't you wish that you had more control over society's appetite for dread and panic? Do you wish that your doomsday scenarios had as much clout in Washington as those of other people? Do you think you could do a better job of dreaming up the next apocalypse? Well, it's time to take control of your apocalyptic angst. This week and this week only at World's End Theology Outlet, we are offering a special product straight from Gozer the Gozerian. It is called Choose Your Destructor. Yes, now you can dream up your own end-of-the-world scenario. Perhaps you want it to go by complete ice age and freezing the planet out, or maybe an intense period of global heating, or maybe just the regular run-of-the-mill nuclear war. Or perhaps you want to think totally outside of the box and have the world destroyed by the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Either way, whatever pops into your head can be the way that the world ends, thanks to Choose Your Destructor, available this week only at World's End Theology Outlet. Back to you, Don. I was hearing a lot of noise when I was talking. Do you know what that was from?
I plead guilty. That was my keyboard sending both of you an email.
Wasn't sure what was going on. I decided I would just keep talking. Yes. You know, I have you were talking about all of the extensions on the pause button that the climate, I don't know what to call them, the climate, the anthropomorphic man-made climate people were insisting was the case. Yeah. At some point, I had a flashback to when I was a teacher, because one day a mother came in with a one of those Ziploc storage bags, and inside the Ziploc storage bag was her daughter's homework. It had been eaten by their dog. And this is, I didn't realize that this could actually happen, you know. And she was there to prove that her daughter did the homework, but the dog ate it, and she helped her daughter pry it out of the mouth of the dog just so that she would not get a failing grade. And then, lo and behold, I don't know when it was, after 9 or 10 years of the pause, these climate scientists were saying the ocean ate my global warming.
Yes.
But they didn't present anything in a baggie, so I couldn't verify it. Their parents didn't show up.
Let me speak to that, because that's a really interesting trick. On the one hand, it could be true. It literally could be true. Now, we don't know yet for sure whether it's true, because we haven't been doing anywhere near statistically representative ocean temperature samples for long enough to know. But it's at least a plausible hypothesis. Now, here's the real problem with it, though. The claim that they're trying to defend is the claim that our emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere are going to cause warming of the atmosphere so great as to disrupt climate all over the world, to wreak havoc on ecosystems, to wreak havoc on human economies, and to bring about catastrophe. That's an increase in the temperature of the atmosphere. Now, what they're saying is, oh, well, that increase in the temperature of the atmosphere hasn't happened because the extra energy being held into the Earth's climate system by the added CO2 in the atmosphere is being held down in the deep ocean instead of up in the atmosphere. That's actually a plausible hypothesis. So far, there's not good empirical evidence to support it, but it's plausible. But you got to keep your eye on the P, you know, the old shell game where you get 3 walnut shells and one of them's got a P under it, and you start moving them around, and you got to keep your eye on the one that's got the P on it, under it. The P in this case is the hypothesis that the temperature of the atmosphere will rise. Now, the very fact that the temperature of the atmosphere has not risen anywhere near as much as their hypothesis claimed it would disproves their hypothesis. What explains why the hypothesis is false is an interesting question. But that it explains why it's false does not mean that the hypothesis was true. So, you know, and furthermore, by the way, the The sequestering of that extra energy in the ocean rather than in the atmosphere means far less difference in temperature of the ocean than it would in temperature of the atmosphere, because the ocean is a much greater mass. Every 30 feet of ocean has as much mass as the entire atmosphere of the Earth, which is over 60 miles worth. And at an average depth of over 15,000 feet and covering over 70% of the surface of the Earth, the oceans can absorb an enormous amount of energy without any significant change in temperature, which means that if their hypothesis is right, if this energy trapped by CO2 is being absorbed by the oceans instead of by the atmosphere, then frankly there's nothing to worry about.
It proves too much. Well, here's the problem, though, for those of us who aren't trained in science, we tend to believe this idea that heat rises, and if you are using CO2 in the atmosphere to trap the heat, like a big CO2 dome around the planet, as it were, the heat would be trapped, somewhere, in the middle of the atmosphere somewhere. How does that heat go down into the ocean? How does that happen?
Well, other things being equal, yes, heat rises, but air flows can bring heat downward. Radiant heat always rises, but once that heat is absorbed by a molecule, if that molecule is pushed downward by something else, then it will go down. And heat also transfers. There's transfer of heat from one item to another. So if you put a hot skillet down on your nice Formica countertop, you can scald the countertop even though the countertop is below the skillet. That's because of the heat transfer between the two. So yes, heat tends to rise, but it also simply radiates. It moves in all directions.
Now, one of the premises of that great apocalyptic doomsday, end of the world, climate change movie was that some kind of huge under-ocean, transoceanic current was going to be disrupted by climate change. And it would seem to me that if anything were to cause that, it would be the absorption of all this heat into the ocean, and yet instead of causing this great, terrible catastrophe, it sounds like it's actually a good thing. It's actually slowing down climate change.
Well, the idea behind that, and this was put out by Al Gore in his film An Inconvenient Truth, which, by the way, a British judge ruled had, I believe it was 16 significant scientific errors, so significant that the film wasn't allowed to be shown in British schools any longer unless it was accompanied by a list of those errors correcting them. But at any rate, Gore put this idea forward. It's called the notion that the thermohaline circulation would slow or stop. Now, the thermohaline circulation, most of us know by the name of Gulf Stream, although it's actually significantly more than the Gulf Stream. It's the circulation of water through the ocean in a current that goes up the east coast of North America, and then across below Greenland and over to Great Britain and Scandinavia and Europe. Then it goes down the west coast of Europe and down the west coast of Africa, and actually around the tip of Africa up into the Indian Ocean, and then back around, and it comes back around along Antarctica back to South America and goes up the east coast of South America. Now, it's driven by the cold water introduced into it in the Arctic, heading southward, and by the warm water introduced to it in the equatorial area, heading northward. And then, of course, in the southern hemisphere, the opposite. The cold water around around Antarctica drives it, and the warm water around that equator drives it. But the idea is that with the warming of the Arctic, you wouldn't have as much cold water put into it, and cold water is heavier than warm water. And since that's what pushes the thermohaline circulation along, if you diminish the cold water entry into the circulation, you slow the circulation, and that supposedly could result in a sudden chilling of the whole Earth and a sudden onset of a new ice age. Now, actually, it turned out that there was zero empirical data to back any of that, and it's since then been totally abandoned by all of the scientists working in the field.
Okay.
All right, let's shift gears just slightly, because one of the things that we were talking about, and is also in the climate hustle, is the attorney generals. A number of attorney generals, it's called AGs United for Clean Power.
Yes.
Are moving toward, it seems like, prosecuting or and as a result squelching any opposition to the climate change advocates. So they are wanting to subpoena climate deniers.
Yes. Yeah, as if someone could deny climate. But that's the way you caricature your opponents and beat up on a straw man. Any logician knows the fallacy of that. Even most non-logicians know that that's not fair. Misrepresenting your opposition. Here's what's going on with the AGs United for Clean Power. First of all, you know right from the get-go that they are concerned not about law but about politics. How do you know? Well, first of all, their name, AGs United for Clean Power. That name picks up on the name of President Obama's legacy regulation from the EPA, the Clean Power Plan, which is designed to force America to reduce its carbon dioxide emissions from electric generating plants by about 32% by the year 2030. That would cost hundreds of billions of dollars, destroy hundreds of thousands of jobs, raise electricity rates around the country by anywhere from about 11 to 25%, hurt all kinds of people, and complete, full compliance with it would, even according to the US EPA, reduce global average temperature in the year 2100 by less than 0.08 degree Celsius. But that's the name of the legacy regulation that Obama has, and these AGs adopted it into the name of their organization. That's the first hint that this is politics, not law. The second hint is that at their press conference launching their organization, one of the main people on the stage was Al Gore, former vice president and author of An Inconvenient Truth and of Earth in the Balance, his book back in 1990, in which he said, by the way, that fighting global warming needs to become the central organizing principle of human civilization. And the means he outlined for doing that are, frankly, the totalitarian's dream. But the third reason you know that this is all politics and not law is that of the 18 attorneys general involved, from the District of Columbia, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and 16 states, one is an independent, and not a single one is a Republican, which indicates that there might just be something partisan behind this. And then finally, we also now have, through Freedom of Information Act demands, emails showing that these guys coordinated this activity with Senator Sheldon, Democrat of Rhode Island, who called for this kind of action in an article that he wrote in the Washington Post back in May of last year. To which, by the way, I responded to that and another article that he wrote in October of last year, in an article of mine in October, in which I pointed out that this is an attack on free speech and free press rights of the First Amendment, guaranteed by the First Amendment. And Senator Whitehouse, by the way, responded rather angrily to me by name in a speech on the Senate floor in October of last year. That's right.
That's a rare honor that you have there.
I consider it an honor. And now, he said that this is not on free speech, because whereas the First Amendment protects free speech, it does not protect fraud. Well, that's true. The First Amendment doesn't protect fraud, but the legal definition of fraud is that somebody tells what he knows to be a falsehood, something that contradicts established material fact, right? He knowingly tells this falsehood, and he does it in order to get someone else to do something that will enrich himself or hurt that other person, and the other person actually does that, and the other person actually suffers the harm. That's what's fraud legally defined. Now, the problem is, you won't be able to prove anything like that in this case because, frankly, thousands of scientists all over the world have held thousands of different positions as to the warming effect of added carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, as to the effect of that warming on various ecosystems and on human civilization, and as to how we ought to respond to it. All of this is up for grabs. It's all being heavily debated. And the only way, really, that they could wind up with any convictions on this sort of thing is for us to have a ministry of truth, styled after the one in George Orwell's 1984, in which the government defines what is truth.
We're going to take a quick break here, and Ron has another one of our sponsors that sort of coincides with what you're just talking about here, Cal.
Well, I have my own questions. I want to hold my spot and reserve my right to ask these questions when I get off. When I get back on, that is. But in the meantime, I'm hearing an echo. How about you guys? Are you hearing it?
No, I am not hearing an echo.
Okay, it just suddenly went away. There you go. Okay. Well, the following is a public service announcement from the Institute of Approved Mentality. Do you judge the validity of arguments based on data and logic? Do you have a tendency to question the things you hear in the media? Do you think the consensus can sometimes be wrong? Do any of these things bother your family, friends, or co-workers? Well, there might be a serious problem here. These are all well-known symptoms of anti-science syndrome. Anti-science syndrome is a serious condition that may prevent you from holding proper opinions as approved by society's cultural elites. Depending on your location, this can result in serious consequences, ranging from being mocked by high school kids on YouTube to arrest and imprisonment in more enlightened countries. But there is hope. Treatment programs are available through the Institute of Approved Mentality or through any state university's Department of Political Science. The Institute of Approved Mentality promoting intellectual hygiene through programs of mass re-education. Back to you, Don.
All right. Well, you wanted to hold your place for a question that you had, so go for it.
Yeah, I'd like to get back to Dr. Judith Curry because, to me, there's a kind of an intersection here between laws that people are proposing to basically, let's just flush our whole Constitution down the drain. Al Gore has identified the central organizing principle for the future of not just the United States, but all humanity. So obviously nothing that the Founding Fathers wrote could possibly apply to this situation. We must just shred it all and begin again. And that means get rid of freedom of speech and right to assemble, right to petition the government for grievances, everything else. And it also brings out a whole new set of consequences in this Orwellian situation. People have already been suffering these, it seems to me. You alluded to the fact that Dr. Judith Curry has now been identified as a climate change denier. Is she going to be first in line when the new global warming party gets together and starts its purge? Is she going to be public enemy number one in this? Has she already been threatened with some kind of legal ramifications?
Well, to my knowledge, she's not received any subpoenas, anything of that sort. So far as I know of, there have been subpoenas issued by Eric Schneiderman, the Attorney General for New York, to ExxonMobil Corporation, and by the Attorney General for the U.S. Virgin Islands to ExxonMobil and to the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I don't know of any other subpoenas issued at this point. The interesting thing, by the way, is that what stands behind these subpoenas is the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, which was designed to target organized crime. By the way, it's not been used successfully to bankrupt organized crime, but it has been used very successfully to intimidate pro-life activists and now climate change realists, as we call ourselves. I do know, though, since I read those subpoenas, that Judith Curry is mentioned as one of the people with whom correspondence between either ExxonMobil or Competitive Enterprise Institute is being demanded by the Attorney General of the Virgin Islands. But she's one of many. They name over 90 different organizations, and they name quite a number, I've forgotten the number, but a large number of individuals as well. And most of these organizations or individuals would not be up for possible prosecution. Rather, these attorneys general want to see whether ExxonMobil has, has been paying any of them to try to promote its message. Now, frankly, by the way, I would not want to invest in any corporation that didn't want to defend its product. Any corporation that just says, "Yep, our product is bad, we shouldn't be making it." No, I wouldn't want to invest in that. I wouldn't want to buy its product. I wouldn't want to defend it. But if the corporation believes that its product is a good thing, then it should be seeking to promote that product, and I see no problem with that as long as it's not in the process doing fraud. That is, conveying what it knows to be false information about material fact in order to get other people to do acts that will enrich itself and harm them. Now, that's certainly not been shown in terms of ExxonMobil, and as a matter of fact, ExxonMobil has given many times more money to organizations that promote climate alarmism than to organizations that question it. And in fact, it also stopped any money to those organizations in 2006. Now, I might add, by the way, Cornwall Alliance and I are not mentioned in the subpoenas. That's kind of depressing. Means that we're not high on the radar screen.
You're not a target yet. I was going to ask a question, but have you ever been accused of taking money from big oil? And do you take money from big oil? Maybe I should ask that question first.
Number one, no, we do not receive any donation coal from big gas. We receive almost no money from any kind of actual corporations. A few from some very small businesses I discovered just recently, but tiny portions of our income. We are supported overwhelmingly by individual contributions from private persons. In fact, many of these are people who've known me for 35 years.
Are we people like the Koch brothers, for example? Are they the ones?
No, I don't know. No.
So I want to talk about big
you get money from the Koch brothers, but you do have a Koch with your brothers, right?
Yeah.
Yes, frequently. Yeah. Now, second, actually, your first question is, do we ever get accused of that? Oh, all the time. The accusations come all the time. The problem is there's no evidence behind them, and it's
kind of like global warming.
It is. Yeah. By the way, it's a case of what logicians call the fallacy of argumentum ad hominem circumstantial. That is, we don't think you might have something to gain by your arguments being true. Well, tell that to your oncologist when he diagnoses your cancer. Now, fine, you go and get a second opinion, but the fact that any oncologist who diagnoses your cancer could turn out to be the one who's going to do the cancer surgery or the chemo treatments and is going to make some living by that doesn't mean that you reject his word. You go with the evidence. So this is clearly a logical fallacy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what specific consequences in terms of her career, in terms of regular life, has Dr. Curry suffered? And do you know of any other people who have any other specific examples of people who had to give up things just to defend a point of view like this?
Yeah, Judith, and I know Judy personally, by the way. I've come to know her because we've spoken at several venues together. Judy has been ostracized by the mainstream alarmist climate science community, but frankly, she still has very fine reputation among lots of other climate scientists. The notion that the overwhelming majority...
Another name is Rossiter. He's also he said, I'm a liberal. I've been a liberal, and they kind of took away my liberal card because I don't agree with what they're saying.
Yeah, in fact, he and Judy and I were all speakers on a panel last fall and the fall before down in Texas. And he pointed out that as he began to study this issue, he determined that even if global warming was as serious a problem as what the IPCC says it is, the IPCC itself gives the evidence in what's called Working Group 3, the third volume of its assessment reports, that the more you try to reduce future temperatures, the poorer you keep the poor of this world for longer periods. And the poor are actually better off in the warmest scenarios than in the cooler scenarios. And Rossiter points this out, and he got ostracized for it, even though it's frankly right there in the IPCC's own reports. So, he's been ostracized this way. Judy has. Dr. Roy Spencer, who's a senior fellow of the Cornwall Alliance and is principal research scientist in climatology at the University of Alabama and the U.S. science team leader on NASA's Aqua satellite remote sensing system, which is the source of our raw temperature data for practically the entire atmosphere, 24/7, 365, all around the world. It's the most reliable source we have. Roy has been ostracized and attacked over and over again. Dr. David Legates, professor of climatology at the University of Delaware, who's also a senior fellow of the Cornwall Alliance. He's been attacked. Dr. Willie Soon, an astrophysicist at the Harvard-Smithsonian Institute, has been attacked and accused of conflict of interest, though in fact he's been exonerated of that clearly by the Smithsonian Institute itself. There are plenty of others. Dr. Lennart Bengtsson of the Max Planck Institute in Germany is one of the world's most highly respected climate scientists for many, many years. And when he agreed about a year ago, I think it was, to join the advisory board of the Global Warming Policy Foundation, which is a climate realist organization, he began getting hate emails from all over the world from climate alarmists, some of them threatening his family. And the pressure was so great that he just found that he was being driven into extreme stress and anxiety, and he finally resigned from the board of Global Warming Policy Foundation just a few days after he had been put onto it. This is one of the world's foremost scientists in the field, and he gets that kind of treatment. You know, when that kind of thing happens, that the other side, frankly, can't trust the empirical evidence. It's got to resort to threats instead. It's the same kind of thing that happened in Stalinist Russia when the Russian government officially embraced Trofim Lysenko's notions of genetics. Lysenko believed in what was called the theory of acquired characteristics. If you have a frog and you cut off a leg, the offspring of that frog will have a weakened leg. If you cut that leg off, the offspring of that frog will have an even weaker leg, and so on, down to the generations, and eventually you'll have a frog that doesn't have that leg. Well, that, of course, is craziness because it completely ignores the fact that it's all in DNA, not in the outer extremities. And that set Russian science, Russian genetics back by over 3 decades. But the scientists who opposed Lysenko in Russia were arrested by the KGB. They were put in Lubyanka prison. They were subjected to psychological torture, to mind-altering drugs, and some of them were actually killed. That's the same kind of thing driven to the extreme that the climate alarmists are doing right now.
All right, a couple of things because we are near the end of our time. Dr. Beisner, can you tell people how to find your contact information, your website?
Yeah, we are at cornwallalliance.org. That's cornwallalliance.org. We also have a Facebook page, Cornwall Alliance for the Steward Ship of Creation. And we are on Twitter at Cornwall Stewards. That's at Cornwall Stewards. And for the documentary movie that we recently released and that you mentioned earlier, Where the Grass is Greener, Biblical Stewardship versus Climate Alarmism, people can go to wherethegrassisgreenerthemovie.com. That's wherethegrassisgreenerthemovie.com, or they can simply come to cornwallalliance.org and click on the Shop tab, and they'll find that under DVDs there. We also have a series of YouTube videos called Greener on the Other Side. Climate alarmism, facts, not fear. And so people can go to YouTube and go to the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation channel there and see all of those videos as well.
Okay. Now Ron is going to have our end credits, and then we'll do a wrap-up.
Okay, well, yeah, this production of the Unknown Webcast, our resident cult leader profiler was Neil before me. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage was handled by Armageddon and D. Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau is headed up by Lou C. Goosey. Transgender issues coverage is by Ben Hur. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Technical assistance provided by Murky Research. Our legal advisors come from the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Giovanna Pisami. Director of Privacy Assurance is Wiretapping. Our original idea sourcing is by Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc., which is solely responsible for its content, but you won't be able to prove that in court. Back to you, Don.
Okay. Cal, this is going to be an evolving issue, as you and I and Ron are well aware, because really it's a spiritual battle. And so we're coming down again to which religious worldview is going to cause inform your decision making and how you will live. Unfortunately, on the side of the climate claimers, the ones who are claiming that humans are destroying the earth and they want to bring the population down to just several million by hook or crook, wherever they have to do, that is a religious view that they are promoting, and we do have to be able to stand up and defend the faith, not only theologically, but scientifically.
So when they want to lower the population to just a few million, are they volunteering to assist in this pruning of the population?
Yeah, they're volunteering to assist, but not to participate in.
Not to be part of the pruned out.
Right.
Okay.
They don't want to be part of the pruned. They want to be pruners.
Okay.
Yeah, and by the way, it's not a few million that they want to prune. They want to bring total human population down to about 300 to 500 million, which means they have to get rid of about 95 to 97% of us. Correct.
That's correct. So they want to bring it down to a few million, not by a few million, but to a few million. 300 to 500 million is what they think the number is that the Earth can sustain.
That's sustainable, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that is it, and we will do this again in the future as new things pop up. So, Dr. Beisner, thank you again for being a part of this.
Thank you very much.
As always, I'm glad you're out there marketing for our advertisers, and we'll see what we're going to have now. Next week, by the way, we're talking to a pastor turned missionary to India. It's been pretty interesting for me to kind of follow what he's been doing, and we're going to talk to him a little bit about how apologetics fits into being a missionary in India. So it'll be fun. See you all next week.
Thank you.